What's going on, guys? Mike Murda's Gamer Logic, and today I want to talk about random encounters in RPGs and how much I personally loathe them. At least I do now. You know, I didn't always hate them though. Back in the day, my first real RPG I ever remember playing would be Dragon Warrior, aka Dragon Quest, on the Nintendo Entertainment System or the Famicom. And there was something very, very awesome about walking around and fighting these random monsters and fighting them over and over and over and over again to keep building up your experience points and basically keep earning levels and become stronger. And I can recall, through the various year and a half or more that we played that game, just for hours sitting there and just walking around and fighting random monsters, and at some point being so strong in the game that it was almost a waste of time getting in the random encounter because you knew the result. You were going to hit fight, your attack was going to hit, and the enemy was going to die. And we finally got to the end of that game, and we fought with the Dragon Lord, and I think we took him out in like 5 or 6 hits. And you felt like a real badass doing that. Well, fast forward all these years later, I have a hard time playing older RPGs either for the first time or revisiting them that have what I call the invisible random encounter. And the invisible random encounter would be the same as a random encounter in, say, a Dragon Warrior, Dragon Quest game, or a Final Fantasy game, where you walk around a couple squares and then bam, you're taken out from the world map or the dungeon, and you're in the battle mode, and you defeat the enemy and you move on. And like I said, didn't bother me so much as a kid, but now, especially if the game isn't balanced very well with random encounters, or is a game that makes you grind to get where you need to get to at a ridiculous amount of stuff, it instantly turns me off of the game, which is unfortunate because this game itself may have a great storyline that you want to experience. So a lot of times I'll fire up these older RPGs, these retro game RPGs, and just can't get into them because I'm so sick of getting hit by the random encounter every 2 squares I walk on. And a lot of times, if I really want to stick with the game and I've never experienced it before and I just want to get the storyline of it, which to me for an RPG is the biggest thing of it, and obviously the boss fights, I'll cheat. I'll use a Game Genie code or an Action Replay code, and I will get my characters up to level 99, or I will get them at a decent level, or turn off random encounters completely. Because to me now, having a limited time to play games on a weekly basis, and a limited time for anything really, I cannot sit there and experience random battle after random battle every time I move 1 or 2 squares on a battle screen. I just don't have the time for it. So like I said, I'll use Game Genie or Action Replay and get up to level 99. So if I absolutely have to do the random battles, at least it's quick. And does that take away a little bit of the experience when you get to some of the bigger bosses? Yes and no. If a game is done right, it doesn't matter what level you're at. If you don't know the strategies of the game, the way the combat system works, you can still get your ass kicked by some of the higher level bosses or even the mid-game bosses in the game. May it be by their spells or certain attacks, you still need to understand the combat system. So it takes away a little bit from things, from the simpler bosses. One hit, they're dead. But it doesn't ruin the gameplay experience completely, at least for me, because I can still experience the big part of the game, and that is the storyline. Now, with that being said, there were a couple games out there that did random encounters very well. And the reason they were done well, in my opinion, is because you could see the enemies coming at you. You knew when to expect it. In some games, you could actually turn it around and sneak up on enemies. And those 2 games, the first one is Earthbound, if you can see that there. Earthbound, and I think Mother was the exact same way. The random encounter system in this was great because you could see the enemy on the map. And if you managed to hit it from a certain angle, like if you snuck up behind it, you could get the advantage, which means you would get not one attack, but 2 attacks. The other great thing about Earthbound's experience combat system is if you were a certain level, there was like a level cap for enemies. So just throwing out numbers here, say you were level 10 and you were fighting a level 2 rat. Well, if that enemy decided to come attack you, you would win automatically. There would be no interruption with the battle system. You would just defeat the enemy and that would be the end of it. And that was awesome. Another cool feature about Earthbound was if you were really up there in the levels and you approached certain enemies, they would run in fear of you. That is awesome design, in my opinion. Now the other one that featured random encounters, and it was a little bit different. Some you would be forced to fight enemies because it would be triggered sequences, but some of the lower level foes, kind of the same deal. They were around the area and sometimes you could just avoid them. And that was Chrono Trigger. Yeah, Chrono Trigger had a lot of fights in it, and that was one game where, yeah, you kind of needed to grind to see some of the side quests or really get all the endings, but there were 2 things that made it great, and that was the fact that you could see the enemies, sometimes you could avoid them, you didn't always have to refight them. And the other great thing about Chrono Trigger is this was the first time, or at least the first time in the US, I think, that you could get a new game plus by beating the game, especially when it had 9 endings. I mean, would you want to restart Chrono Trigger over and over and over again and have to get all your party members up experience points wise so they were strong enough to fight certain enemies? Hell no. So Square was smart at that point, and they added in the New Game Plus. You got all your equipment, all your weapons, and you were able to take that and go on and restart the game again, get a different ending, and keep building up experience points. But it made it fun because you could blow through the enemies, the minor enemies that weren't really important, and try different attacks and stuff. And I wish Final Fantasy 3 would have done that, because Final Fantasy 6, I should say as well, 3/6, because I think I would have revisited that even more. I did revisit the hell out of that game when I had the time when I was young. Now, not so much. I wish that would have had it. Final Fantasy 7 had it, which was great because we replayed the crap out of that game. Final Fantasy 8 had it, which was great, but 9 didn't have it, if I remember correctly, and I don't know if 10 had it either. But I am one of those people that definitely appreciates New Game Plus, the fact that you can go through, play the game again, and keep your experience. Otherwise, if I just don't have time, I gotta cheat. That's the unfortunate circumstance of it. There's some games that I'll take the time to level up on. The last Fire Emblem Awakening, was a great example of a game I didn't mind leveling up on because I could see the enemies, I knew they were coming, and I could have a little bit more of a strategy to it. There was a reason for me wanting to fight the enemies in that game, mostly because you had to advance, and I guess you could say that for any RPG. But the combat was an important mark for that, and building up levels wasn't a chore, and that's why I enjoyed it. Same thing with Castlevania Symphony of the Night, when they took the RPG elements to that and you had levels up. You could grind in the game, but it was quick because there was nothing that really interrupted the action. It was all in one and all in the get-go. So I'm curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are on building up experience points in RPGs, random encounters in general in RPGs, and what your thoughts are on them. Obviously, there's a lot of people out there who still play RPGs, and maybe it's not so much a matter of time, they just get a longer experience out of the game because they don't mind grinding as much. So I'm curious to hear, and thanks for watching.